Would our clerk please call the roll? And she's available to do so. Thank you, Hillary.
Sure. Senator Alvarado,
Present in the room.
Senator Carroll, Senator Higdon,
Present in the room.
Senator McGarvey.
Present remotely in the district.
Thank you. Representative Gooch.
Here.
Representative Gibbons-Prunty.
Present remotely from my district.
Thank you. Representative Sheldon. Representative Wilner.
Present remotely.
Thank you. Senator Meredith.
Present in the room.
Representative Elliott.
I'm here.
Thank you.
And our first item is the approval of the September 30th, 2021 meeting minutes. Motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. And the minutes are approved. Our first presentation will be on severe mental illness waiver, and I would call on Steve Shannon and Dr. Sheila Schuster to please come forward and introduce yourselves for the record, and then you may proceed. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you very much. And we'll get our PowerPoint up here.
You're too good.
You're going to handle that?
Yes, I anticipated that would be the case.
Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Sheila Schuster. I'm a licensed psychologist and executive director of the Kentucky Mental Health Coalition. I'd like to thank co-chairs Elliott and Meredith for inviting us on this important topic and members of the committee. You want to introduce yourself?
And I'm Steve Shannon. I'm the executive director of CARP, which is an association of 11 to 14 of the community mental health centers in Kentucky, and they serve about 175,000 people statewide, 43,000 of which are people with severe mental illness.
Okay, you want to go to first slide? So there's probably not been as much interest in SMI or severe mental illness as we've seen ever, and I've been coming up here for 40 years, but this year has really been a landmark year, and we appreciate the attention that the legislators have given both in this committee around various issues, but also with the SMI task force, and some of you will also serve on that. And we have really honed in on what is really a very small percentage of people in Kentucky, but with very significant needs, and a group that really has been overlooked over the years. So I have several definitions for you. The Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration, known as SAMHSA, has a definition. There's also one in Kentucky statute. And what you'll find is that both of them include an age of onset, so we're talking about adults here. We're talking about a diagnosis, and there are probably 4 or 5 that we think of as being the SMI diagnoses. There's definitely an impact on functional activities, and there's a time frame. So this is not a one-time and gone kind of thing. This is lifelong, and we're going to look for duration of at least 1 year, if not 2 years. I think in the common vernacular, we think of SMI individuals as those who lose touch with reality. We think of them as having what we used to call psychotic disorders or a psychosis, which breaks their ability to be able to understand the difference between what they are perhaps hallucinating or having delusions about and what the reality is. And that is a lifelong situation for them. So in 2020, the CMHC served and supported approximately 43,000 people diagnosed with SMI. We think that it's anywhere from 2.5% of the population to maybe as much as 5%, but somewhere in that range, depending on the definition. So you all have heard, and some of you serve on the Hcb Waiver task force, which also has gotten a lot of attention during this interim session. So the home and community-based waivers, many of which have been in existence for a number of years, include these 6, and they're for the acquired brain injury, short term, and then also the acquired brain injury long term. And those are the most recent ones to have been added. We have the Hcb waiver, which is the basic home and community-based waiver. We have a very small, what they call Model 2, which is for people that are ventilator dependent. Then we have the Michelle P. waiver, which is serving a number of people not with a residential option, however. And then we have the supports for community living, or the SCL, which has a residential option. And that's going to be important in our later discussion about cost and also what we think should be in this waiver for folks with severe mental illness. We also know, because you all directed the cabinet in the 2020 budget to develop a waiver for substance use disorder for those who are incarcerated. And that waiver has been submitted. We've been waiting months to month for it to be finally approved by CMS. So look at who's covered in this and then ask yourself what group is not there. And that group is the SMI group. So that's the one group of people with disabilities in this Commonwealth who have never had a waiver specifically designed for them. And remember, a waiver is that you're waiving the usual Medicaid services to add services for a defined population and a defined set of services. So we're going to say the defined set of population should be those with an SMI diagnosis, and we're going to talk about the 2 services that we think are the most important. So why do we want to do an SMI waiver? Because there are services that these folks need that are not available through traditional Medicaid. And again, for those of you who have been on the SMI task force, you've heard, I think, every meeting, a consistent message. Those 2 are supported housing and supported employment. It also takes advantage of our very favorable, what they call the FMAP, or the Federal Medicaid Assistance Percentage. I mean, one of the, I guess, benefits of being as poor as Kentucky is that we have a very favorable match from the federal government. So it means that we put up $30, the feds put up $70, and we get to spend $100 on those services. So it's a great deal. If you think about any kind of investment that you would want to make, if you could put up $30 and know that you were going to get $100 worth of services or goods, you take it in a minute. So it is a good deal financially. So here are the services that we think are the most needed, and that is supported housing. We know that folks with severe mental illness get involved in what we call the revolving door. They, for whatever reason, and the most typical pattern is that they quit taking their medications, often because of side effects, sometimes because they go to the pharmacy and there's been some kind of screw up and the prior auth didn't get done, or the pharmacy doesn't have the medication, and they say, Nate, you're going to have to come back next time. Well, unfortunately, our folks with severe mental illness hear that as, that voice told me I shouldn't take that medication. And they go and they don't come back. We have a mom, Kelly Gunning, who many of you have met, who's so active with NAMI Lexington, and that's what happened to her son. 6 months later, the police in Chicago called her and said, "We have your son here." And she had to go and get him and bring him back. He was under charges there for disturbing the peace. I mean, fortunately, it was not, a felony. But he had wandered, been homeless, been attacked, had all kinds of things happen. And he gets back here, and then they have to start the process of convincing him again that he really needs to be taking his medication. So what you get in housing is you get somebody who's monitoring that. And what you get in the waivers is if somebody misses their medication, that's reported. If they're out on their own, if they're on the streets, if they're living with family even, if they miss their medication, nothing happens at that point. So there's no record and no ACT team that goes to them and so forth. So there are a number of residential services that could be offered. 3-person staffed residence. I know Senator Higdon is familiar with those for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. There are people with severe mental illness that might fit into that model. Others are going to need something very different. You could have a family home provider. We want to teach people about being a good tenant so they can keep housing and remain in their housing. And then you can also have extensive in-home supports. You're going to hear later from our friends Tom Walton and Adrienne Bush about medical respite. And I want you to think about the housing option in the SMI waiver and how medical respite, which is a very needed service, could also be woven in to those housing supports. And finally then, and I know this is of interest to Senator Alvarado especially, we have supported employment down here. We want our folks to have meaningful employment at market rates. We want them to be in competitive workplace environments. And for them to be able to do that, they're going to need a lot of support. Voc Rehab does a good job. We have job coaches. We've heard from some of our community providers that they're doing that, but we want our folks to feel like they have some purpose in life. All of us do better when we have some purpose and feel like we're contributing back to the community. Steve, I think it's yours.
All right. Again, Steve Shannon. Kentucky's not going someplace no other state has gone before. We're going to do things, we're going to try to replicate, but this has already happened. Florida and Hawaii have used an 1115 waiver mechanism. There's primarily three, 1115, 1915C, which is the waivers that we currently have, the 6 that Dr. Schuster mentioned, and then a 1915I waiver mechanism as well. But Florida and Hawaii has done this, and they have supportive housing in their programs as well. Looking at SMI populations, maybe SMI and homeless, SMI and SUD, but they exist, are those two mechanisms. The other piece is 4 states have a 1915C waiver, and those are Colorado, Connecticut, Massachusetts, and Montana. So again, other states have done this. They figured out the service, and those look at those. They have supported employment, they have pre-vocational services, home-delivered meals, so they have a residential habilitation option. They have services that we're talking about, and the value is other states have done this. I looked at this several years ago. At that time, for every $10,000 spent on Hcb waivers in the country, 50 states, Guam, Puerto Rico, everybody, $13 were spent on people with severe mental illness. 13 out of 10,000. I contend if someone owed me $10,000 and they gave me $9,987, I'd take it and be happy and forfeit to $13. The amount of dollars spent on waiver services, Hcb waiver services, is almost found in the cushions of the sofa. 1915I, 12 states do this, okay? It's a mental illness, substance abuse. It's not quite the same as the Hcb waiver, but it's a waiver to provide services. Again, I don't know if I have a preference. I like the Hcb waiver mechanism because I'm familiar with it, but we can move forward and do a waiver. So what's this going to cost? And that's really what I'm going to talk about at the end here. But one, message is we know what people need. Heard that from Dr. Schuster. 2, other states have done this. Let's see if we can replicate that here and move forward. We're looking at the biennium of 23-24 fiscal years, July 1 of 22 through June 30th of 24. I contend year one, this is going to take a lot of work to get done and planned. You know, we got to figure out who's covered. I said 43,000 people with SMI. We're not proposing a waiver for 43,000 people. Let's figure out who needs it, figure out the details of it, get it approved by CMS. We have regulatory processes to go through, things like that. So year one, the expense is going to be staff at the cabinet. Other folks may participate. They won't be paid for that. But the cabinet staff, and I can't tell you what that number is, but that needs to be part of the deal. But the real message is in year 2 of the biennium. Fiscal year 24, July 1 of 23 to June 30th, 24, looking at 100 people served that year, okay? The next slide shows you a breakdown of what that 100 people looks like. We expanded the SCL in 2000, maybe it was, Sheila. You didn't serve everybody the first day. So when you have the waiver in place for 100 people in fiscal year 24, you're not going to serve 100 people for the whole year. It's going to take a while to get that done. So all I've done, and this is my model, not modeled to anybody else, not taken from everybody else, 8 people a month for the first 8 months, it gets you to 64. 9 people a month for the last 4 gets you to 100. But if you look at it, in July of 23, we'll have 8 months of service, not 100. right? And it builds up to June 24, you have 9 new people, 91 existing people at the bottom of the slide. So you have 634 months of service for those 100 people, as opposed to 1,200, okay? Because you're going to phase it in. It's going to take time. And some months we'll hit 8, some months we won't. But this is a way to project how we're going to get to that number without planning for 1,200 months of service for 100 people. That's not going to happen, just phased in. Again, that can be manipulated, changed any way you want, but I think it's a good gradual process to get people enrolled. 8 a month for the first 8 months, and then you go to 9 for the last 4 to get to 100. Then I looked at a model, and the SEO waiver that Dr. Schuster mentioned has a robust residential options, okay? So I looked at a 2019 number. Annually, it was $78,603 for the SEO waiver, okay? And that not everyone gets residential, some do, some don't. So using that, we're going to look at fiscal year 24. So we're 5 years down the road from that number. So I bumped it by 10% just to cover the cost of what's going to happen over the 5-year period. That gets me to about, and you look at that slide, $86,463 a year, okay? That's what I'm projecting the cost to be. Again, all my assumptions, manipulate it any way you want. The $78,603 is a solid number based on the cost that we've seen in the Hcb task force, Senator Meredith. That's how we got to that number. Then you divide that by 12. And you divide it by 12 to get a monthly figure. And that gets you to $7,205 per month. Okay? Previous slide, we saw 634 months of service in the year. You multiply it out, and you get to the bottom figure there. Again, 634 times the 7,205, $4,468,150. Okay? That's what it costs in fiscal year 24, the second year of the biennium. And as we said earlier, Dr. Schuster said we have a 30-70 match rate. So you end up, Kentucky needs to put forth about $1.3 million in 24 to roll out the waiver. And the feds will give us $3.1 million. And our match rate is actually better than 30-70, but for this purpose, that's what we're going to use, the 30-70 to get the $4.4 million for the biennium. The next biennium, 25-26, it's more expensive, obviously, because those folks will get a full year of service. We'll have 1,200 months. I would encourage people to expand it again and go forward. And even that, Kentucky would spend about $9.2 million in the next biennium. But this coming biennium, $1.3 million plus cabinet expenses can serve 100 people in the first year. Okay, 1915C, 1915I, 1115, whatever and Medicaid knows these waivers. They'll make the decision that's the most appropriate. Need residential options, support employment, good safe home, and a good job. It's not really a high bar. It's not really exceptional services. And I believe Kentucky can do better and must do better. Questions?
Well, thank you for your presentation. I'm told that annoying racket in the basement is flooded, and they're trying to stop the water. So it was
nice.
It's not going to come. It's not going to come from the ceiling, right? It's going to come up from the basement.
I have an old house. I can probably help them with a flooded basement.
I was going to try to stop the construction project, but I probably shouldn't intervene. Do we have any questions?
Question, please.
I'm going to recognize Co-Chairman Meredith.
Thank you both for your testimony. Certainly I've been privy to it over the last several months with being on appropriation revenue and budget review for human services and the 2 task force you made reference to. And I think part of the reason we've seen a shift in emphasis to groups like this, that return on investment has become part of our lexicon, which we haven't seen in state government before.
Yeah.
But I think there's a realization and kind of an epiphany that it costs us more to do nothing than try to do something. Mm-hmm. And I think your numbers bear that out.
Yeah. And
this isn't criticism of your presentation, but I think what's lacking from it is whenever we present this to appropriations revenue, what they're going to see is $1.3 million that we don't have. Mm-hmm. What they'll say we don't have. Well, we do if you look at it in terms of return on investment. Mm-hmm. But we don't do a good job of documenting that.
Right.
And I think potentially by doing this, we're going to save it probably 20, 30 times over.
I think you save it in ERs, right? Healthcare costs. You save it in jails. People are going to spend time in jails. I say if people don't get seen, they don't disappear. These folks will appear someplace and absorb services at those locations. There's probably folks in nursing homes, Senator Alvarado knows, who would benefit from this waiver, right? So I think you're absolutely true. And the reason I didn't include that is I can't give a number on it.
But you're going to have to, Steve. And
Yeah.
I think that's the issue, is that every group that we hear will tell us, if we do this, we're going to say this.
Right.
And I've asked the question, okay, where is this?
Yeah, I'm with
And they
you.
go,
Right.
what do you mean?
Yeah, no,
I had a
I
committee
understand.
where I asked 3 times, where's the savings? And finally they said, well, there's not really any because it's going to be absorbed in the system. I think that's another epiphany I've had this year, is that we have so many services that are underfunded that whatever savings we realize are just used to make up those funding shortfalls. And I'm not sure that's appropriate either. But without really identifying where this return on investment is, I think it's a very difficult sell, because we don't have a commensurate reduction someplace else. It's just additional expenses out of there. And I'm not saying that to
No, I'm with you 100%.
well, I support this initiative, but I think we've got to add something to it in order to sell
We can
it.
do that. We will do that.
Well, and think about, we talk about Tim's Law, and we've had that discussion, and that's not been funded. The gentleman that was named after was taken away by the sheriff after his mother filed a mental inquest warrant in court 34 times. What do you think it cost us for her to go down to the court system and file that warrant, get a sheriff over, take this guy over to the old Eastern State Hospital and hold him there 3 days, 7 days, 14 days, 21 days. So part of your savings is that revolving door back to the hospital as well. And we need to put a figure on that. I hear what I'm saying.
I know it's there. You folks heard me say it 1,000 times that
Yeah.
I think there's enough money in the Medicaid system to take care of everyone if we spend it the right way. But we got to be innovative in the way we do it and truly measure those outcomes. And we don't do a good job of that at all. There's very
I
little
agree with
accountability for this program. And I'll go back to the MCOs. Supposed to improve the health of the population.
10
Been had it
years.
for 10 years has not happened.
10 years Monday.
Yes. So
I'm with you.
we've got to do a better job at that.
I agree
don't have any
100%.
problem at all expending the funds as long as we can show there's a true return on investment, and we can move this
And we
state
will have
forward.
that. We
Thank
can
you.
do that.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Co-Chairman Meredith. And Dr. Schuster, I know as an attorney, I've represented many of these individuals who oftentimes they wind up in jail. I have a client now who was suffering from severe mental illness. And unfortunately, when you file these mental inquest warrants, a lot of times after 72 hours, they're released. And sometimes they act out very quickly after they've been released.
Yeah.
And so I know I've had conversations with the jailer in my home county, and he often tells me that the county jails are now being used and are facilitating as hospitals for the mentally ill because of our unwillingness to deal with the issue.
Gentleman coined the phrase trans institutionalization,
Yeah.
not deinstitutionalization.
And luckily with this one client I'm thinking of, his parents have the means to get him the help that he needs. But oftentimes that's not the case,
That's not
you know,
the
because
case,
it's
right.
already run into thousands of dollars.
Yeah,
So
I think
I'm
it's definitely true that
empathetic to the argument
yeah,
that you're making. I think that we have to do more than we're doing, but we have to also do it in a way that's effective but I appreciate the presentation that you've given.
I'm sure that the jailers would appreciate not having those people in the jail because they don't like.
Well, I hear
they
that
don't
every
like them
time.
there.
You know, every time I interact
Yeah.
with the jailers in my county, I hear that in both of my
absolutely.
counties, as a matter of fact. And so I think that this, you know,
And we don't
is-
want them in jail either.
right. Well,
I mean, being mentally ill isn't criminal.
well, and when they act out, it's typically as a crime. You know, it's
Yeah,
not
yeah.
going in the
Right.
grocery store and buying food. It's going in and stealing food.
Yeah.
So, Representative Prunty is recognized. I think, is she on Zoom?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question has to do with the age, the 18. Can people not be identified before 18? I understand that's legal age, but why 18? And why not before?
Typically, under 18, we call that severe emotional disturbance, SED. And so it's just a difference in diagnostic category. And there are special services for youth under 18. So that's why they use the 18. Yes, we've identified them, and many of those kids end up then as adults with an SMI diagnosis. But they're
Gotcha.
called,
Okay.
children with SED or severe emotional disturbance. Yes, ma'am.
You may have told that in our first presentation. I remember SED.
Yeah.
But Mr. Chairman, if you could indulge me a few comments.
Sure, go ahead.
I serve on the SMI task force as well. And it just so happens, I feel like we live in this world where we boing from one extreme to the other. And I'm reflecting back on your initial presentation to SMI, Dr. Schuster, about how, that the institutions were open and everybody was let out. And it's like, how can we find the middle where they get what they need and have some housing and are not, that they can be stable. So hopefully we can get to the middle with all this. But I toured the circuit court in Hopkins County yesterday, and I spent about an hour and a half with Judge David Massmore, and he was talking about, they got their own SAMHSA grant and did drug court. And he talked about how drug court's really working there, and goes from $7,000 per year for treatment versus $33,000 per year in incarceration. And he talked about dual diagnoses and that sort of thing. And he talked about putting more funds into treatment versus incarceration, which I know we've got talk about judicial reforms and that sort of thing. I feel like all these things overlap, and hopefully somehow we can get those figures from you all about where the cost savings are. And I mean, I feel like a waiver is due, and I think it's doable, and I would support that. I feel like we just need to be talking, like, the judicial system needs to be on this conversation and on the SMI conversation. Mr. Chairman, my jailer presented in committee, SMI committee. I hear the same thing from my jailer, my sheriff, my police chief, so we just need to, these aren't individual issues. They're all overlap. So somehow we need to make them all integrate to get the best solution. So thank you for your presentation, your continued passion and work on this issue. And we'll reach out to you if I have further questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I just want to say that we had a judge from Lexington's mental health court, and I've forgotten his name, but he may have some figures for us, because that's a new mental health court where they are keeping people out of incarceration. And he presented to the SMI task force. So we will get in touch with him through Kelly Gunning at NAMI Lexington. Thank you.
Senator Higdon is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Sheila, you made the comment about the staffed home or staffed residences, and they do a very good job. It's a good model. Unfortunately, if you look at the number of mental health folks that we would need to house, if at 1.4%, the low end of your spectrum, that's 67,000. At 5%, you said it could be as high as 5%. That's 225,000 people. If we do a waiver for and allow 100 people, it'd take us 67 years, because I know what's
Right.
Every year you'll be back wanting to add, needing to add 100 to it every year.
Right.
So it's a daunting task. It's it's just it's I don't know. It's depressing to think that we have that many mentally ill people in Kentucky that need this program. But I guess we get a lot of calls. I think everybody on this panel and every member of the General Assembly every year for the Michelle P. waiver and the other waivers. People begging, saying they've been on the waiting list for years and years and years, and it's a sad situation. But I wish if I had a silver bullet, we'd be able to find the money to do all these, but unfortunately, there's no silver bullets.
Right. And in the IDD, intellectual development disability world, the Michelle P. and the SEL waiver, I mean, that population is maybe 3% of the population. It's a big number. And they serve combined about 13,000 people. So we have no expectation of serving 43,000 people in a residential setting in this waiver. But let's identify who needs it the most and grow it from that perspective. And the SMI population is a little bit different than other waiver populations. Maybe at 12 months, 18 months, they can transition to their own apartment with support. So it's not they move in and stay forever like happens in the SEL waiver. So maybe there's that opportunity as well.
Well,
there's a lot of people who need the service.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I do think there's an opportunity for people to move through the system. And we heard some testimony in the SMI task force from Wellspring, for instance, and New Beginnings in Louisville and in Lexington about getting people getting the services they need and being able then to diminish some of those services and move people along a continuum. Now, that's going to take some time, obviously, but there is that difference maybe then between the SMI population and the IDD or intellectual developmentally disabled population, who tend to be pretty stable in their functioning and need that same level of care. You know, our folks need an eye on them, certainly through their lifetime, but they can get into recovery programs. We've seen some miraculous things happen in recovery programs, actually.
You know, I guess I was looking at what it would take to do the entire population, and you talk about them transitioning out. Do you have in your mind a number that would be a constant for the state of Kentucky to take care of our SMI population as they move in and move out? Obviously, 100 won't do it.
No.
200 probably won't do it.
No. I don't know, Sheila. 1,000, 5,000. Michelle P. started at 10,000, and it took, I think it was 4 years, 6 years to get to 10,000. You know, so they phase it in over time to get to that number. The SCL was 3,500. It was about 1,500 for about 15 years. There was no movement on that whatsoever, and it's been added to since then. And that's how many I think is in the SCL program now, getting a residential option. So, you know, I wish I could tell you the 43,000 who would need this, but you're right, it's not 100. This is to start it, figure out how to do it, and then come back and show the effectiveness, show the outcomes Senator Merritt talked about, and the savings from other places. And I really think there will be. I think that people won't be at places that are more expensive and not nearly as therapeutically valuable. You know, jail's not a good place if you're mentally ill.
Thank you.
You know, the other thing is that we are constantly developing new medications for the SMI population, which you don't have in the IDD population. And we had wonderful testimony actually from Communicare from Dr. Carmen Pinto, who you know, I think, Senator Higdon, talking about long-acting injectables. One shot for 6 months could give people the amount of medication that they need to deal with their psychotic condition. Now, that doesn't mean that they've learned skills or that they've been able to socialize and learn some of the other things that they need, the tenancy, the ability to be a good tenant or to get into supported employment. But we're developing medications that really could move people along in that continuum, which again is the difference between this SMI population and the population with intellectual developmental disabilities.
Senator Alvarado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm taking notes here of all the things because we start talking about these topics and my brain starts to flow with all the different ideas and thoughts. Just for the sake of education, I think and I mentioned this in our last meeting, I think, in terms of our nursing homes. I just had a discussion with one of our admissions coordinators at one of my quality meetings, one of my facilities yesterday, talking about this because quality measures, if people get treated with antipsychotics in an outpatient setting or in a hospital setting, you can write as many of those as you want. No one's concerned about quality. But for some reason in our nursing home settings, people have perceived that if you use an antipsychotic for people, that you're trying to snow people and knock them out, you're hurting them, and you're a bad facility if you do it. But what we're getting now is almost, I'd say probably half of the patient admissions I get or more are not little folks with dementia for a hip replacement or something like that. People with schizophrenia, people with mental illness, they have nowhere to send them. They've been in the hospital for 4 to 6 months. Let's just send them to a nursing home. and the beds go down. We've had a lot of COVID deaths. We need to fill the beds. Just take them. I'm not a psychiatrist. We have very limited specialists available in this realm, and they come in. And then I'm tasked with, hey, you've admitted somebody. Yes, they've got a diagnosis. Yes, they're an antipsychotic, but it counts against your numbers. And therefore, the more antipsychotics you prescribe, the lower your quality rating is for your nursing home. And you wind up getting dinged and you lose points and you get labeled a lower star facility, which you see in the newspapers and attorneys sue for and all kinds of fun things. So you can imagine what's happening now is a lot of these folks are getting backed up. They have nowhere to go. Nursing homes are saying, are you on an antipsychotic? Maybe completely legitimately and doing well on that. We don't know if we want them because it's going to hurt our quality measures and it's going to affect us. And this is the kind of stuff that we're encountering in healthcare all the time. Really, really frustrating. Couple of things. The other thing I'm going to bring up also, and I've kind of broached it, and I'm having a bill prepared. Many of you have heard of the super speeder bill we've seen in Georgia. Maybe some of you, and I have the chairman of transportation here. But we've struggled in the past with certain medical costs in our healthcare system, many of them related to trauma and different things. There's a trauma network we never fund. I'm looking at using that super speeder to help, if we can get it past the General Assembly, to start using those funds, particularly to fund trauma networks. We see acute brain injuries, and we see people that have, those are very expensive slots. I want to say $90,000 per year. We struggle in getting, we might approve 8 per year, and we're lucky if we get that in our budget to say, hey, let's dedicate funds from people that are speeding at 20 miles over the speed limit to use those funds to help fund certain things in our healthcare system, ABI being one of those. If you can free up some of the monies from that to be able to dedicate for programs like this. So there's different ideas and thoughts. I'm trying to think outside the box of finding other ways of funding systems we've talked about every year that I've been here that we have a hard time finding ways to fund. When we add this in, it's clearly needed. So there's 2 things I wanted to broach with that little preamble, Mr. Chairman. One thing is the cost. I know you mentioned on page 13 and 14 of the presentation there about a projected adjusted annual per person cost of $86,463. So suffice it to say, we would say if we're going to fund 100 slots, you're looking at about $8.6 million as far as total cost. There's a 70-30 match. Would that be accurate? So the number you give in the next page about the 4.468, that's for an actual per person over their lifespan or over the time that they
that's
need?
the first year because you're going to phase people in. July 1 of 2023, I don't anticipate 100 people getting the waiver slot.
But in the long term, let's say this got up and running.
Long term will be 8.6, correct.
8.6, 30% of that would be around probably 2.5, 3 million.
Yeah.
Somewhere in there.
2.7.
Okay. So that was the one thing I think we need, because if we're going to request that, we need to make sure we have an idea of what that's going to cost us down the line as far as annual costs. The other thing we talked about was employment that you broached. Obviously, it's near and dear to my heart. I filed a bill every year for the last 4 years. Yes, and I know there might be a little bit of discrepancy with both presenters on this, but I think everybody wants to see the same objective down the line in terms of that. And we've got something that people call different things. Sheltered employment is a term, and lots of different terms they have out there for it. People with disabilities in particular are hired. They might be, over the years, over a long period of time, we've established programs that were, supported by government to allow individuals with disabilities to be mainstreamed into the work environment. And they're getting paid a lot of times saying, well, they're not as productive as an individual without the disability, and so they have lesser work, and they multiply that factor by minimum wage and say we're going to pay you less than minimum wage. So a lot of individuals are out there, and a lot of families love the programs, then people do very, very well in them. We have very responsible employers who are employing them for that. However, for me, it is a dignity issue in terms of at least being able to pay those folks at that minimum wage level at the very least, because they are productive in doing a lot of those things. And I've got a bill that I've proposed every year to try to phase that program out. Grandfather people that are in, families that like it, people that like it, that want to stay in that, employers that are doing it, but start closing the front door on new employers. And I know there's always been a concern about, do we have enough programs to support that? So I thought maybe you guys could just maybe briefly talk about that and thoughts on that. And again, I file it every year without trying to force it through, but it's something I think
we've had this conversation before. One, supported employment is not sub-minimum wage. Supported employment is at least minimum wage. That's part of the definition of the service. The programs you're talking about are traditional day programs that initially do piece rate work, and they pay sub-minimum wage under a certificate from the United States Department of Labor that permits them to do that. And if they're doing it in the community, they have a contract to do it through their license. Okay, and we've had this conversation. The concern that I have and that I've expressed is the last count was about 4,000 people in day programs, or maybe more than that. What's the plan for those people? What's going to happen? Where there be opportunities for them about 30 hours a week, Monday to Friday, right? And folks will say, yes, there will be. I just don't know. I also don't know if there's sufficient staffing for that many people in, to transition out. But I understand your bill is not closing the program. It's not enrolling new people. And I think, and even the last bill you filed, there was a 5-year period before that would start. So we all would know the transition and go from there. So I think, that's been the concern some of my members have expressed, because they have programs that serve a fair number of people. What's going to happen going from there? Interesting, during COVID, there's folks who were begging to be able to go back to work, because one center in Bardstown, they operate the recycling center, and they couldn't have their day program, and folks are going to the recycling center making more than minimum wage. They're not sub-minimum wage workers, and they couldn't do it, and the recycling center was getting a little frustrated. So I think we understand where you're coming from. We get that. It's just, what's the plan for these folks? And again, it's not closing the program. And I've said this before, over time it will close the program. At some point, the economic principles, the critical mass wouldn't be there to sustain it, and you go from there. But I think that's where we're at. But supported employment in this waiver is not a sub-minimum wage service. People would make whatever is made in the community, the job they are placed at. They'll get that hourly rate, and they get supports from a job coach, And I know what a job coach is, because at one point I was a job coach, and I actually went to a training at Auburn, joined the American Associations for Person-Supported Employment. The next month, Tennessee had a member. I may have been the first member of supported employment in Tennessee, 1987. But that's where we're at. That's the concern, 3,000 people. But this is supported employment. It's not sub-minimum wage. It's not a day program. There is a day program now for SMI that is not work-related, it's skill-related, therapeutic rehabilitation. Good question. And I suspect you had heard me say that before.
Thank you, Steve Shannon and Dr. Schuster, for your presentation. I don't think we have any other questions, so we appreciate
Thank you all.
your time.
Appreciate
Thank
your
you very
having
much.
us. Thank you.
And we'll get that information for you.
We promise, Senator Meredith, you'll have it.
Our next item is Lifeworks at Western Kentucky University, Dr. Mary Lloyd Moore, David Wheeler, and John Kelly. So please come forward and begin when you're ready. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you very much for having us here today. We appreciate the opportunity.
I'm going to recognize Co-Chairman Meredith if you can hear him over all the beating that's going on. This was his agenda item today, and I think he has some opening comments.
I do, Co-Chair Elliott, and thank you for the opportunity. We did hear this presentation last week in budget review. Was it budget review? I'm sorry, I lose track of my committee. Health and Welfare, excuse me. Senator Alvarado, who chairs that committee, co-chairs the committee, was kind enough to add this to agenda. And obviously here today to talk about its impact on the Medicaid program. And I personally think it's a great program. It was mentioned earlier about our severe mentally handicapped individuals. That's a kind of forgotten population. And I think our young people with autism, that's kind of forgotten as well. A lot of things have been overshadowed over the last couple of years because of COVID, but this certainly is a needed population, and services that we can system with is warranted. But I thought this was such a unique program when I first heard about it that I thought it warranted being heard by our health and welfare as well as Medicaid oversight, because I think it can impact it. And after their presentation, we talked again about how there could be a return on investment on this program. But I appreciate you folks being here, and I think committee members, if you've not heard this before, I think you'll be excited about this program and see it has tremendous potential. So thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having us here, Co-Chairman Meredith, Co-Chairman Elliott. We certainly, and members of the committee, we are most grateful for the opportunity to bring this program to you. My name is Dr. Mary Lloyd Moore, and I'm Executive Director of the Suzanne Vitale Clinical Education Complex in Bowling Green. And this is Mr. David Wheeler. He's the executive director of the Lifeworks at WKU program, and he's got over 25 years of experience with Life Skills Incorporated, where he worked with state general fund dollars through his entire tenure, and the Hcb Waiver for 13 years. And we also have Mr. John Kelly with us, who is the founder of our Kelly Autism program and parent of an adult daughter with autism. And as I say, it's our extreme privilege and pleasure to be here with you all today. We're here to talk about our Lifeworks program, as well as to sound the alarm about an unaddressed problem for the Commonwealth of Kentucky, as well as to offer a cost-saving solution to the problem. Lifeworks at WKU is the most recent addition to the Suzanne Vitale Clinical Education Complex, whose purpose is straightforward: to provide a seamless curriculum of education and support across the lifespan for individuals and families impacted by autism, while at the same time providing exceptional evidence-based practice training for our students there who are at the CEC. We begin our programming at 15 months of age in the Renshaw Early Childhood Center, or what we call Big Red School, moving to the primetime program in the Kelly Autism program for elementary, middle, and high school students. And then when our students are ready for college, we have a Circle of Support College program where we support 60 individuals on the spectrum as they go through WKU. The CEC has more than 15 years of experience in positive outcomes for individuals and families served. And our newest addition to the concept of a seamless curriculum across the lifespan is the Lifeworks program, which is a separate 501c3 and an outgrowth and continuation of the CEC. At this point, though, I want to make it absolutely clear that we receive absolutely no funding whatsoever from WKU. We are housed there, but we receive no funding from WKU. Lifeworks is a program that's designed for those autistic individuals who have the ability to move to independent living and become contributing members of our society. And our program is a model, replicable program for the entire Commonwealth of Kentucky. And so David is going to tell us about the program.
Sure. Thank you. And thank you for allowing us to be here this afternoon. I'll tell you that the Lifeworks at WKU program is Kentucky's only independent transition program of its type that allows young adults with autism to learn the skills they need to live independently and to obtain and maintain employment. And so we have a brief video here that'll give you a good overview of what the campus and what a day looks like there. So, yeah.
Welcome to Lifeworks at WKU, a living and learning community for young adults with autism and other learning differences. Located in Bowling Green, Kentucky, Lifeworks is a nonprofit 501c3, offering a variety of programs to support your transition to a life of independence and employment. The Lifeworks campus is situated on half a city block at the foothill of Western Kentucky University and is within walking distance of beautiful downtown Bowling Green. The complex consists of a centralized community building and 3 newly renovated apartment buildings known as the Julie and Gary Ransdell Living and Learning Community. Participants of the 2-year Lifeworks Transition Academy reside in modern townhouse-style apartments that are comfortably furnished and feature a fully equipped kitchen and laundry facilities. Our participants live independently or with a roommate and are supported by 24-hour access to the Lifeworks staff. The multifunctional community building is where participants gather to take classes and enjoy hanging out with friends. The common areas include a comfortable sitting area and a spacious communal kitchen, perfect for preparing and enjoying group meals together. The large multi-purpose rooms are where friends gather for game nights and other fun activities. In our state-of-the-art classroom, participants gather daily to receive instruction in the areas of career readiness, independent living skills, and social engagement. The community building also houses multiple meeting room spaces, private study areas, and our staff's administrative offices. Lifeworks at WKU is a supportive living and learning community where individuals are empowered to realize their full potential and successfully transition to living lives of independence, self-direction, and employment. Come discover what life has to offer at Lifeworks at WKU, your bridge to independence.
Our participants are there for about 24 months. They're there through the summer and winter. There's not a break. And a typical profile, as you'll see on the screen, it's a young adult from ages 21 to 30, young man or woman with autism. Their intelligence levels range from low average to well above average, and their socioeconomic and educational backgrounds are varied. A program is not a group home or 24-hour staffed residential program, and participants begin living in an apartment on their own upon enrollment. Therefore, each participant must possess the capacity, motivation, and level of safety awareness to live independently. We currently have 8 participants enrolled. There's 4 males and 4 females from across the state, including Adair and Jefferson, Nelson, Webster, and Warren counties. And they each have varying backgrounds and each have different education levels, but they all have in common something referenced on the slide, and that's a failure to launch. And so, but all have remained a lot of them have, some have attended college and some haven't, but something they share in common is that they've returned home unemployed with no relationships, their skills have regressed, and self-confidence and sense of direction is non-existent. Another shared commonality is something that we hear from their parents who have voiced concerns about what will they do, how will they manage when the parents no longer are available or have the capacity to provide care for them. And so, here's one of our current participants now, and her name is Joy. She's age 29. She's in her second year. She's diagnosed with autism and anxiety, especially social or specifically social anxiety. She struggles with executive functioning. She graduated from college in 2015, returned home, and remained stagnant, no job, few personal relationships, low self-confidence. And then she enrolled at Life Skills in September of 2020 when we launched. And I look at her now, it's 12 months later, she's living on her own with her cat, and she's employed 25 to 35 hours a week. She's making new friends, she's driving independently, serving as a role model for other participants, and pursuing her art, something she really wants to make a living of is creating and selling her own art. Our program goals are all the individuals there have an individualized service plan, and those are tied back to our 10 core areas or 10 program outcomes, which is employability and life skills are the primary 2. This is how we do it. For someone like Joy and others, we provide instruction in the classroom and hands-on training and support outside the classroom, in their apartment, in the community, and on the job site. We require and support individuals to participate in community service learning, volunteerism, and employment. We've partnered with area businesses and industries to help boost the ongoing workforce development initiatives across our region and the state. We facilitate growth in the areas of confidence building, social and interpersonal skills, and relationship building. And lastly, I want to point out that we provide an option for individuals in our region who want to commute, and that's called the Bridge Program, and they're able to participate in our classes. We have a 32-course curriculum that we teach over the 24 months. Each class is 17 weeks long. And if individuals want to not necessarily live and receive the full package of services there at Lifeworks, they can commute and attend these classes. Dr. Moore?
Thank you. Thank you, David. So I would like for us now to turn to a few statistics, and I think you have those in your packet, but I'll go through them anyway. The incidence now is, the incidence of autism is 1 in 54 according to the Centers for Disease Control. There are an estimated 82,000 plus autistic individuals in Kentucky. There are 50,000 plus individuals with autism in Kentucky between the ages of 18 and 64, which is the population that we serve there at Lifeworks. For your reference, that's 10,000 more people than in the entire city of Covington and 10,000 less than the folks in Owensboro. pretty good segment of our Commonwealth. The lifetime cost for individuals with autism ranges from $3.5 to $5 million across the lifespan. And families, interestingly, who have children diagnosed with autism earn 30% less than other families due to the additional responsibilities involved in caring for their children on the spectrum. It costs $50,000 per year for individual therapies for children with autism who are under age 8 years. And the majority of costs for autism supports in the United States are for adult services, and an estimated cost of $175 to $196 billion a year for adults, compared to $61 to $66 billion a year for children. Staggering numbers to me. There will be 500,000 autistic individuals aging into adulthood in the next 10 years, but 85% of college graduates with autism are unemployed or underemployed, compared to the national unemployment rate of 4.5%. And a contributing factor to this statistic is the lack of training in job readiness and life skills. The average cost of home and community-based waiver services in Kentucky in 2019 was $49,000. But as we all know, there is a waiting list for waiver services, and there has been. So we are in a state of crisis in terms of support for autistic adults, and I am here to sound the alarm and offer a solution. I hate to sound an alarm without offering a solution, but the alarm is sounding. By age 22, publicly funded education and services cease to be available as families reach what has been called the Great Service Cliff. You all are aware of this, I know, and the lack of support services available for adult individuals with autism. We have a unique need for a unique population that has not yet been addressed here in Kentucky. We get calls from all over the state inquiring about our program Lifeworks. These calls, these people, these families are starved for our services, and when they learn about the program specifics, they say, "This is too good to be true," and exactly what we've been looking for. So, as I've said, we are indeed in a state of crisis, but we have a solution that is cost-effective for the Commonwealth of Kentucky. The tuition of the Lifeworks program is $50,000 a year. These costs are for operational expenses only. The facility has been paid for by the most generous support of Mr. Bill Gatton and Mr. Gary Watkins. Personnel expenses are, as you can see, $985,752 per year for 18 staff members. Non-personnel expenses are $401,788 for a total of $1,387,540. Our capacity for the Transition Academy is 28 participants, with the actual cost per participant being $49,555. As you heard previously, we serve individuals in the Bridge program, and our capacity there is about 100 participants, but I'm really focusing on our transition program today. There is no wiggle room in our budget. The tuition of $50,000 is necessary, but as you all know, it is more than most families are able to afford. And we do not intend to be an elitist program, and we've got to find a source of support for our Lifeworks program. There are very few programs of this nature in the United States, and absolutely no other programs in Kentucky or surrounding states. And as you can see in the slide, our tuition of $50,000 is the lowest available, with a range of $94,000 per year in Chapel Haven West in Tucson, Arizona, to $57,000 at 29 acres in Dallas, Texas. The cost of funding a participant for 2 years is $100,000. Subtract the state income tax from successful participants, which is they're earning $36,000 a year times our 5% income tax rate times a 42 work life, and I got that by ages 25 to 67 being a 42-year work life, gives you a total of $75,600. We got to subtract 10% to account for the 10% who will not work for a total of $68,040. So the total cost of $100,000 for the 2-year program, less the reduction in cost of $68,040, gives us a total of $31,960 net cost to the state for funding one participant. And then if we look further, the lifetime cost of not funding a participant is $2,400,000. And we arrive at that number by multiplying the average 60-year lifespan past age 18, so between 18 and 78, by $40,000, which is the cost per year for public support. And then we get the expected success rate for Lifeworks participant allows for a reduction in the above cost of $22,400,000 per person to $1,768,040 across the lifespan. And finally, the cost per class of 28 participants is $49,505,120, with the total savings for three 2-year budget periods being $148,515,360. And this calculates to a savings per net dollar spent of $56.32. So that's a pretty good return on the rate, it seems. The support provided by three 2-year budget periods will allow us to put in place our plan for sustainability that includes individual participant tuition contributions, Office of Vocational Rehabilitation funding for some participants, Hcb Waiver funding for some participants, charitable gifts from both corporate and private entities, and grant funding to cover these costs. We're also hopeful to create, with your help and approval, an autism waiver for such services in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. We need time to work out the details of this plan, so I'm not going to present that today, but that's on our list of things and on our list of our how we're going to create sustainability for this program. So, as you see in here, we have an issue of statewide emergency and international impact. We know that some 50,000 autistic Kentuckians, give or take, are at home on the family couch. They have the capacity and desire and a whole host of unique strengths to offer to the workplace. We have a model, replicable program that can help mitigate the problems associated with the impact of autism on individuals and families, and ultimately save dollars for Kentucky. Lifeworks at WKU is the only transition program in Kentucky created to offer the pathway to independent living and working productively, thus providing a vehicle for autistic individuals to be contributing members of society, contributing to the fabric of life, as well as contributing to the tax base we have here in the Commonwealth and in the United States. But we need your help. We need a line item budget of $2,800,000 over 3 budget periods to provide for the Lifeworks program. It's finite support. We will be financially viable and feasible with a runway. But what we need is $2,800,000 over 3 budget periods. And this dollar amount will provide a runway for 84 individuals in the transition program, in addition to 100 more participants in the bridge program, to be productive members of society and potentially save the Commonwealth $1,768,040 over their lifetime. we can help them to be contributing members of our Commonwealth, able to pay back some of the cost invested in them by the dollars they will return based on the salaries they earn when employed, and lessen state and federal dollars spent in their support over a lifetime. We have the opportunity. Not only do we have the opportunity here, I feel like we have the responsibility to provide assistance for this growing segment of the population to become more self-sufficient. But, as I've said, the tuition of $50,000 is too steep for most families to afford without help. And we've got to create a vehicle for that help. So would you please help us to offer them a chance at a more independent, productive life, at the same time providing cost savings for the Commonwealth of Kentucky, as well as to create a roadmap for other Kentucky communities that need such a program. As I've mentioned, it's a model program, it's a replicable program, and we could serve that model across the Commonwealth. So please come and visit us at Lifeworks in Bowling Green. We would love to have you come and show you exactly what we've got in the works. And again, let me thank you for the opportunity to be with you all today. We certainly appreciate the opportunity to describe what we have. Thank you. John, did you want to add anything to what we've said?
Just to reinforce 2 points that you mentioned, but I think are important. Lifeworks is very much a person-centered plan. This is not a one program fits all. It's a great deal of time and effort is put with the individuals at the front end to be able to identify capabilities, likes, and developing a transition plan that will get them to that point of successful employment, to a career. It's not, here's our package, here's our program, come, and at the end of it, you get a little certificate and away you go. There's a great deal of intricate, detailed job support that goes on in the process. It's part of a continuum of services that, as Mary Lloyd mentioned, starts with our kids that are, I think our youngest in the Big Red School is just a little over 12 months old. Realizing as they age, we have to develop programs for them. That's why we got a college program for those individuals that had those resources. But the college program, again, is limited to a group intellectually, financially, socially, that are able to handle a university environment. Far greater percentage of those individuals cannot without a great deal more support. Lifeworks provides to those individuals who have the raw capability for us to be able to help mold with the support of the personnel and the curriculum and the environment that we have. The social skills that are necessary to be able to function, live independently. That definition is a very personal one, but to live as independently as possible. And through the focus on job coaching, making sure that we are tying them together with a career opportunity. That's the focus of this. From the very beginning, is to be able to make that transition from, as you saw, individuals in our program that come in and are unable to work or are living at home and don't have those resources to be able to go out and successfully handle a job and the responsibilities, pressures, and obligations and opportunities of a career. Career is the key that we're talking about here. It's not just getting a job. It's developing a career based on their skills, capabilities, likes, and opportunities. So again, as Mary Lloyd said, we appreciate the opportunity of coming. Thank you for your interest. And we look forward, hopefully, to support to address a growing problem. It's not going away. As you heard in the earlier presentation, these are numbers that are increasing. And Senator Meredith, I think your point coming back on return was very important for us here to be able to say, upfront dollars here for a limited amount of time, which affords us a runway to establish the momentum of building the corporate and private support to generate the endowment base to support these scholarships long term. It's a timing issue, but a timing issue that if we handle properly can afford the state an opportunity for a very limited time investment with a long-term gain. Again, we thank you.
Well, and we thank you for the excellent presentation, and I think it's quite extraordinary that This is one of 11, I think, as I counted, programs in the country. So it's very unique, and I have appreciated your presentation very much. Do you have any questions?
Comment, please.
I'm going to recognize Co-Chair Meredith for some comments.
Thank you again for your presentation and just for the committee's information and benefit. I'm going to ask these folks to do it one more time at our budget review for Human Services. I liked the first program the first time I heard about it. I loved your presentation last time, and I love it even more today because it is consistent with my philosophy of what we need to do with the Medicaid program. And again, committee members, the reason I asked them to present to this committee is it does have a direct impact. You know, our proposed budget, we're going to spend $15 billion on Medicaid over the next biennial, and that's a lot of money. And if we quit spending money on people and we'll invest in people, there is a salvation of that program. And I appreciate you identifying what the cost is of doing nothing, because we don't do a good job of recognizing it, but that is a real cost, and usually it's substantially more than doing something. So I appreciate your numbers and appreciate this program. It reminds me of that commercial where, you know, you talk about it costs $50,000 a year, but you give people hope, and that's priceless. It truly is. It really is a beautiful program, and I commend you and thank you for being here. But
thank you,
Mr. Chair.
Senator Meredith, for the opportunity. Thank all of you for the opportunity. And I like your comment about
yes,
hope is priceless.
Please do. Go ahead.
I just said I like the comment about hope is $50,000 is $50,000, but hope is priceless. And
that's good. I have a question. Do you anticipate, if you get this budget request, that you would have a lot of out-of-state interest based upon the 11 of these programs nationwide? And I know you mentioned there weren't any. I didn't look at the various states, but there aren't any in the surrounding states. None. So do you anticipate there would be some?
I anticipate that I will say what I anticipate and then call on the others to say what they anticipate. But I anticipate that we will get inquiries across, because there are so few, because it is such a need, because our loved ones and friends on the autism spectrum are aging into adulthood. We will get the inquiries, but because there are no programs in Kentucky, if we could develop our program and then pepper them across Kentucky, we could serve Kentucky folks only. So do I anticipate those inquiries? Yes. With funding, we can say we're serving our Kentucky brothers and sisters only, if that makes sense.
It does. Representative Prunty on Zoom.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sorry, it took me a minute to unclick. I have a few questions, if you can indulge me.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. Thank you so much. I heard your presentation before. I really appreciate this second time. I guess a couple questions I have. One is, why are these young people not identified earlier, and why do they not get those skills K through 12? Before they become young adults? Is it a matter of maturation, or can you speak to that?
I think that the effort is made for them to get the supports that they need, but maturation is one. It takes a while to mature. It takes a while to focus on the job that you are meant to have, the ability to move into housing on your own, and I think that we provide the person-centered planning in a very concentrated way that is not available prior to this point. What we offer would have helped me when I graduated from college. We won't talk about me, but I graduated in 75, and I could have used this support. I think that when you focus on moving to an apartment and getting a job and receiving the supports necessary to live and to be a contributing community member, that's different, and it comes at a time in their lives when it is necessary. David, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, That's a very good question. Good thing you've pointed out. These students or these participants, these individuals that come to us, they come with a lot of skills already, and they've acquired a lot of skills from school and from neighbors and family, grandparents, Sunday school teachers. They come and they just haven't really had the opportunity or the organic environment or the accountability to practice these things. And so they come to us with skills, and we help them learn to generalize those skills in all areas and to develop new skills. It's really something different. We'll have parents come and visit, and then they'll think about it, and they'll call us back several months later, and they'll say, well, we've thought about this. What we're doing at home is not working. And so everybody's a year older, and it's like with Joy's family, you know, when she went home for 6 years after graduating, no job, not even that first part-time job like we had when we were teenagers. And so, you know, for her to make that step has been huge for her. And a lot of it is maturity and confidence building. But until they're put in that situation to where they're living on their own, there's 3 apartment buildings right behind our classroom administrative building, and they're living on their own. And we provide support, but it's a little bit different than like in the SCL program or other programs where it's 24-hour, you know, supervision, those kinds of things, and they're held accountable for those things. And so it is like we talked about, a living, learning environment, but they do come with a lot of skills. It's just being able to, you know, with their executive functioning level and cognitive rigidity and those things, we kind of work on all those things together, and it seems to be working.
And perhaps you have to get the parents out of the way too, I'm sure, in some cases. But, I'm a former physical therapist. I work with kids, a lot of pediatric patients, many of them with autism. But why the magic 2 years? How did you get down to 2 years?
We have observed other programs, and 2 years, we feel like, gives the appropriate runway to develop the skills that they will need to function independently. We do not want to put in place a program that is going to take a lifetime. We don't want them under our watch, so to speak, for a lifetime. But the 2 years is based on other model programs, and our designing the program seems to be the best fit for what we're doing, for a transition academy, for a transition program, transition to independent living and working and contributing to communities.
Thank you. I mentioned having a conversation with Judge Massmore from Hopkins County yesterday in during a previous presentation, and he said his drug court is 2 years as well to get rid of addictions. 2 years is just kind of popping up as kind of a standard measuring stick. So that's why I wanted to ask about that. And then finally, do y'all have why so many diagnoses with autism? It just seems to be rising, and it's like you never heard of it years ago, and I just wondered what your all's.
You know, that's a fascinating question. I used to think that we were just diagnosing better. I'll speak, and then the rest can speak. I used to think, well, we just have a better way to diagnose autism, but every year we see more and more and more, and that could be a part of it. I think our environment plays a big piece in the development of autism. We're ingesting what we eat, what we take in, what we breathe in, and I think that has an impact. And I think that sets up the perfect conditions for autism. I hope I live long enough to find exactly what the cause is, but I do. I have watched myself change over time, thinking, oh, our banks are just wider than they used to be. But I do think that there is more there, and I hope I live long enough to find out exactly what it is. David, do you have thoughts on that?
I don't. I just know that it is increasing, and I did Michelle P. Waiver assessments from 2007 to 2019, and I went into more and more homes to where I saw 2 kids with autism in the same family, and just instead of 1, and so it seems like it's not going away, and they are getting older and need to transition to the next phase. And so I'm just excited that this opportunity has been created, and I'm glad to be a part of it. So
thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your indulgence.
Thank you. We have a question from Senator Carroll, who's a member of our committee on Zoom, and I don't think he's able to get through to us, but he would like to know, would state funding support only low-income applicants in the event that there is state funding?
Hopefully, in the event that there is state funding, that would support folks who needed it. I don't think that we envision it to be across the board. If a family can afford the $50,000 just like they afford some colleges in Kentucky, they would be expected to pay. But we certainly don't want to set up a program that we know works, that families who cannot afford it are not able to come.
Representative, that was your question coming back relative to the participants in the program being from the state. We want to make it as ecumenical as we possibly can across the state, where the focus is on the individuals and their opportunities and being able to tie those individuals to a better life in the future, and not to have it driven by the income of their families or the resources that they necessarily have. So at one end, we don't want to limit ourselves by individuals who don't have the resources to come, nor do we want, as Dr. Moore indicated, have this as a program because it's very attractive and it's in a wonderful part of the country that people from out of state see it as an opportunity and to have the program taken by those individuals. We want this to be a Kentucky program. And as we said, we know the individuals in this part of the state, this part of the country, the numbers that are there, the individuals that need this type of a program, and the ability to replicate this throughout the state to be able to address it on a very cost-effective basis. We want it to be a Kentucky program.
Well, thank you. We have Senator Alvarado has a question.
Just really briefly, I know that Representative Prunty had commented on sources and causes and that sort of thing. Obviously, as I'm a pediatrician, this is important for me. We've seen a lot more of it. I can tell you I've done missions trips overseas to Eastern Africa, where I think the first place we went to do physical examinations were 72 children, all with autism spectrum disorder of some sort. A lot of them kind of undiagnosed, but that's what we saw. And there is something, I don't know what it is. I just had a very good friend of mine who's a physician who's had a child who was kind of put into that PDD, didn't really, just pervasive developmental disorder. We don't really know, but something has been diagnosed genetically with an anomaly because as we've learned from the human genome too, since the 90s we've had it mapped, but we're still learning all the time about you're missing a little piece of it here, and a few kids have that and they all have very similar symptoms. There's things that we're learning along the way, but to your point, I think it might be something that's environmental. The day we figure that out will be a great day. I'll be able to hopefully identify what we can do for it. The one thing I do want to clarify, especially in today's climate, a lot of folks are focused on vaccinations and that sort of stuff. That's been dispelled. And I want to get that on the record, let people know that was something that was concerned. I think the University of Kentucky did those studies to actually take about 10,000 children, reviewed it, that there's no connection to that. But you guys do tremendous work. And as Senator Meredith says, the return on investment, something that we often, when we get budget items that we request, our chairman typically asks for, hey, we need to have some kind of proof. And if we don't have proof, it's tough. When we have programs like this, it's already proven. It makes it easier to make those requests. So thank you for bringing those numbers and for the work that you all do. We appreciate it.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
And thank you for being here today. We appreciate it so much. Our next item is medical respite care for individuals experiencing homelessness. We have Adrian Bush and Tom Walton, if you would come forward. And you may begin.
Okay, thanks. No, you're right. And I do have a PowerPoint, so. Oh, perfect. I brought one just in case. Okay, great. Good afternoon, Co-Chairman.
Thank you.
Co-Chairman Elliott, Senator Meredith, Chairman Meredith. My name is Adrienne Bush. I'm the Executive Director of the Homeless and Housing Coalition of Kentucky, or HHCK. And I also represent the Kentucky Interagency Council on Homelessness, or KITCH. HHCK works to end homelessness and fulfill the promise of home for all Kentuckians. And as part of our policy work, HHCK convenes KITCH. Governor Ernie Fletcher established KITCH through executive order, and in 2016, the General Assembly established it in statute through KRS 194A.735 to serve as the single statewide homeless planning and policy development resource and clearinghouse for information on services and housing options for the homeless population. And if that isn't statutory language, I don't know what is. So with that, I will start today with a story of two men. I got a call from the Frankfort Regional Medical Center 2 weeks ago, where a man had received a terminal diagnosis of cancer. The discharged social worker at the hospital had called me because he was living in his car, and he told her he had been working with us to get a voucher before going into the hospital. He clearly needed post-hospital care, but the local shelter is overnight only, which meant he would be discharged daily with a couple of oxygen tanks to carry around and no place to receive home health services. Yesterday, one of our staff told me that we had lost a man after he was discharged from the hospital, another man. Prior to his entry, we had been working with him on a rehousing voucher, as well as starting the paperwork with the State Public Housing Authority for obtaining a mainstream housing choice voucher. But with no good options, the man had been discharged and vanished. In the first case, the man with the terminal cancer diagnosis is now staying with a friend. Probably not the most stable situation, but in the meantime, we were able to get an expedited voucher issued to him, and we're working with him on finding a place that will meet all the federal regulations and his needs so that he has a place to call home and a little bit of dignity in the last few months of his life. In the second case, we have no quick resolution forthcoming. Whatever work we've done to get him stably housed, we're going to have to start from scratch whenever he resurfaces. And what we know from the work we've done over the past 2 years is that he is most likely to resurface through a hospital readmission within the next 30 days. As Mr. Shannon said earlier, we agree with that. People don't totally vanish. They will resurface in other places. This is where medical respite for people experiencing homelessness or respite to residents could be the difference. As a housing organization, the residence piece is central to the whole concept from our perspective. From 2006 to 2016, I worked for an organization in Eastern Kentucky that operated a homeless shelter. So I was no stranger to hospital discharge practices for people experiencing homelessness. In 2019, I was introduced to Tom Walton, who was working to expand medical respite for homeless patients in Louisville. And as a statewide organization, I think it's important to lift up the experiences and concerns of our rural communities. So we convened a meeting where we heard from our partners in Bowling Green, Barberville, Moorhead, others about the issues that their people were facing. This began a collaboration to obtain hospital discharge data, readmission rates, and a coordinated effort to improve health and housing incomes for Kentuckians experiencing homelessness. With that, I'll turn it over to my colleague to introduce himself for the record and his role with the Louisville Health Advisory Board Community Coordination of Care Committee.
So I'm Tom Walton. I co-chair the Community Coordination of Care Committee, and our committee has 3 work streams. 1, to increase screening for the social determinants of health. 2 is to increase navigation to those resources, and 3, to increase communities' capacity to meet the needs in the areas of food, housing, and transportation. Those 3 areas were identified for us, 3 or 4 years ago by a focus group of community health workers. You want me to do this?
No,
So a lot of times when you talk about Medicaid, you talk about respite care. So we're going to keep using the term medical respite, which is something different. So here's the definition of respite care. when we met with the Housing and Homeless Coalition of Kentucky, we realized again that this was a statewide problem. So we have again expanded our efforts. When people, this slide talks about the expenses per day in the U.S. hospital versus medical respite care. I'm going to talk a lot about the return on investment as we move through the slides. I know that the data has to be indexed to individual hospitals and regions, so just keep that in mind. I'm going to use sort of large numbers, but know that it has to go back and be indexed. Today, we're going to go ahead and talk about.
If you want me to go back.
No, you're good.
Okay.
So I'm going to go through and walk through, we've had a lot of conversation about cost savings. So what I'm going to do is talk about where that data actually comes from. In 2012, I served on a population health committee at University Hospital. University of Louisville Hospital. We went back and looked at our most frequent utilizers of the emergency department. The highest utilizer was an individual who I'll call Joe. And Joe visited the ER 223 times in 1 year. He was experiencing homelessness. He had a substance use disorder and an alcohol disorder. So what we did is we convened a community-wide, we called it the Complex Case Treatment Planning Conference, and we had housing providers there. We had emergency medical services, the police department, our psychiatric hospital, lots of people were there, and we developed a plan to invited Joe to go to the Transitions Treatment Center in Northern Kentucky. The hospital agreed to pay $5,000 for his time there. He was there for 3 months, and while he was there, the committee continued to plan about how he could be re-entered into the Louisville community with permanent supportive housing. After the stay, Joe did return, so in the subsequent year, he had 10 emergency department visits. The committee used, we did sort of a back-of-the-envelope return on investment calculation. We used $675 as a cost of an emergency room visit. So 223 visits in the base year yielded costs of around $150,000. 10 visits in what we call the intervention year after he returned from transition cost about $6,700. So the hospital with a $5,000 investment avoided spending approximately $143,000. If a medical respite program was available at that time, Joe would have been discharged from the emergency room to the medical respite program, and then they would have done the long-term planning. A theme that you're going to hear throughout our presentation is a period of intense care coordination. Okay, next.
Okay.
The Housing and Homeless Coalition asked the cabinet for data from the health services and facilities data for the number of people experiencing homelessness. We have the detail by hospital, but here it's presented by area development district. You can see that Louisville, Lexington, and Northern Kentucky have the highest populations, but you can also see that there were people experiencing homelessness in every ADD in the state. Okay, next.
Except for Buffalo Trace.
Yeah.
No, there were 8. It's just that the readmission rate was 0. Pardon me.
I'll get into We'll be glad to get into the details of how it was constructed, but again, to protect confidentiality, if any hospital had 5 or fewer admissions, that data was suppressed, so it's not in the totals. When we saw this chart, so you get just to highlight a few things on there were over 11,000 discharges. The readmission rate of 33%, just sort of an index rate. That's a very high readmission rate. Again, I don't know exactly what it is in Kentucky, but generally you're going to see like a 14% to 16% readmission rate for Medicaid beneficiaries. And I do want to highlight that the $293 million is charges. It's not reimbursement. Again, that reimbursement data is not available in the health facilities and services data. The other thing I want to note, and again, this sort of interfaces what Sheila and Steve were talking about, is the number of people with a psychiatric diagnosis. So we have over 60% with a psychiatric diagnosis, the 2 largest being psychosis and alcohol drug dependence. Okay, next. One of the reasons we're testifying today is you can see that 67% of the over 4,100 people that generated these 11,431 discharges are covered by Medicaid. So we see this as a significant opportunity to deliver better care to Medicaid beneficiaries. Okay, next. When an unhoused person, again, this goes back to the return on investment calculation. When an unhoused person, typically they stay in the hospital 2 days more for a variety of reasons. Sometimes it's difficulty in discharge planning. So those 2 days typically don't generate any additional reimbursement for a hospital, particularly since they're paid with the DRGs. Under increased post-hospital discharge, if a person is discharged from a hospital and has any sort of medical complication like an adverse drug reaction, they're going to return back to the emergency department, and then the increased readmission rate. And again, the rate of 33% is not atypical when you look at the national data. Okay. Many people with Medicare, Medicaid, and commercial insurance experience the fragmentation of the American healthcare system. Homelessness exacerbates that fragmentation. So to this point, we've talked a lot about the quantitative numbers regarding caring for people who experience homelessness, but it also has significant qualitative quality of care implications. Okay, next. These are pictures of some places where people stay after leaving the hospital. They were taken by a nursing school professor who in her spare time volunteers to do street outreach to address medical needs. She reported one case when a person recovering from surgery lived in a tent, cleaned his wounds with stream water, which resulted in an infection and a readmission. This does not have to be our reality in Kentucky. I'm going to talk about 4 potential models. The Hope Recuperative Care Center is in Wilmington, Delaware. It's a 5-bed center. Project partners include New Hanover Regional Medical Center, Anchor United Methodist Church, Winter Park Baptist Church, and the Disability Center. In addition to providing respite care post-hospital, they also provide care for people undergoing chemotherapy. The mission of Hotel Louisville in Bowling Green, picture on the right here, is to advocate, educate, empower, and share in the work of our community to ensure all people have security through safe, affordable housing, healthcare, and nutritious food. They opened their first medical respite house in 2017. They've opened another in 2019. The picture in the bottom left is the Hotel Louisville. The Phoenix Healthcare Center for the Homeless is part of the Family Health Centers, a federally qualified health center in Louisville. They're using a portion of their American Rescue Plan Act funding from I always say HRSA all the time, but it's Health Resources and Services Administration, to move their respite beds from Wayside Christian Mission, which is a shelter, into Hotel Louisville. They're going to rent a floor to allow them to increase their care coordination services and also their mental health services. Not pictured is another hotel-based model which is located in Lexington. Bluegrass Care Navigators contracts with many of the all the major hospitals in Lexington, and they provide medical respite care in a commercial hotel. This allows them to flex up and down based on demand, and also to serve women, men, and families, since all the rooms are single occupancy. I mention this model because it is very flexible and might be adaptable to really every community in Kentucky because it doesn't use a dedicated facility. Next. Common to the 4 models that I just mentioned, and really to all medical respite models, is patient-centered care. I don't have time to talk about all of the spokes of this particular wheel, so I'm just going to make a comment on a few of them. Post-hospital care, what we're talking about is really what we call a non-medical home-like model that will work well in Kentucky if it's staffed by nursing assistants under the supervision of an RN who follows guidelines developed by a medical staff. The connection to ambulatory offices is really key to reducing admissions and improving the long-term health of the people. The National Institute of Medical Respite Care, which was cited on an earlier slide, mentioned the 92% attendance rate for follow-up care if a person was living in medical respite. This is particularly important to avoiding readmissions for people with cardiovascular disease and diabetes, which are 2 conditions that are very prevalent in people experiencing homelessness. Housing and other basic needs often people don't move directly from medical respite care to a stable housing situation because those kind of units are just not available. So many of the medical respite programs focus on getting with people ready, what they call document ready, resolving any kind of outstanding legal issues, applying for benefits, etc., so that when a unit does become available, they're able to occupy it in a shorter amount of time. Okay, next slide. Okay. There are really two core issues on this slide. One is the financial sustainability for the medical respite program. The other is the return on investment calculation that the hospitals, MCOs, Medicaid funders would do. As an example of that, a hospital may do a return on investment calculation and decide to pre-purchase beds to ensure a bed is available when needed if they care for multiple patients with frequent readmissions and high emergency department utilization. A goal of today's presentation was to highlight a cost-effective approach to caring for some of the most vulnerable people in Kentucky. Adrian's now going to talk about some specific asks.
Sure. So we would like this committee to consider funding for medical respite and other flexible housing supports in a Medicaid waiver for Kentuckians with severe mental illness. Could be Section 1115 or 1915, as Mr. Shannon testified earlier. We're not really particular about the authority. We just think it can be done. And secondly, I think, before I move on to the next bullet point, I just want to say, I think I have listened to this committee's meetings over the past year and before that, and we agree with you on wanting to capture outcomes. We do think that this, by focusing a small amount of investment on people who are overrepresented in the hospital and healthcare systems, that we really can make some gains that would kind of ripple out in the rest of the Medicaid system. Secondly, I want to say we want to encourage the development of whole person care pilots. I think it's really important when Tom was talking about the wheel and the different spokes and listening to other presentations, that we are talking about these other spokes that support folks where they are, that all of these systems, like Representative Prunty said, they're not operating in silos, that they interact with each other, and whole person care models really embody that we're dealing with housing, that we're dealing with employment, that we're dealing with all sorts of things. Now, with the American Rescue Plan Act state fiscal relief funds, we believe that some of these activities, at least to start pilots, would be eligible. And we recognize that those funds are limited, but we also recognize that the General Assembly really does have the purview over how ARPA funds are spent. So this is the first time in my career that we have had a flexible pool of funding like this from the federal government, that the General Assembly, if they wanted to, could encourage some of the creation of pilots in rural and urban communities across the state. The last piece that I will just mention, the Hotel Inc. member organization in Bowling Green is one of our members, and the way they have supported their medical respite has been through a partnership through the WellCare Managed Care organization. So at least one of our MCOs are finding that this is actually a good return on investment. They wouldn't be doing it otherwise. They would not be doing it out of the goodness of their hearts. So just wanted to throw that out there for consideration. And with that, I will turn it back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. And I know, coming from a rural district in Kentucky, I have been astounded by the number of homeless people that live in my district. Is when I'm out and about, you think typically of issues of homelessness being in urban parts of the state, but it's unfortunately becoming more of a problem everywhere. And so, with that being said, the example that you used with the, I think you referred to him as Joe,
right?
And how the hospital went on its own there to get him the appropriate care and also save hundreds of thousands of dollars is I think, a wonderful example of this issue and this problem. So I appreciated that example. Representative Gooch has a question.
Actually, Mr. Chairman, it's more of a comment.
And that's fine.
Okay.
I'm in a habit of saying question, but we don't always have questions. So go ahead.
And let me just say thank you for all the work that you do and everyone that's presented here today. And I really believe that there's no question that, we can make investments, and those investments can save us money on the other end. And certainly we all worry about our homeless population. Many of those people are veterans, people who lived here and worked and for whatever reason can't now, or families that have problems because they have children that have conditions and that they can't afford those the treatments and those sort of things. And certainly we can invest in those things and save money, and we're all okay with doing that for people that live here and are citizens and many times veterans. I know this is not what we're talking about here today, but I think as General Assembly members who are going to have to pay the bills, one thing is there is no way we can save enough money. I don't care how creative you guys get to take care of the 2.3 or 4 million people who walked illegally across our southern border, who at some point, a large percentage of those people are going to arrive into this state. And when we can't take care of the citizens that we have now, it's unconscionable that we're allowing this to happen in this country. And I don't want to put a damper on this, but we have to think about that because there's going to be a huge cost to pay because those folks are coming here. Many of them are going to be homeless and are at least in the short term going to require at least temporary assistance. Hopefully that at some point they will be able to, get jobs and be productive citizens or whatever. And then, as I said, I apologize to the chairman. That's not what we're here to talk about today, but that is an 800-pound gorilla in this room that this General Assembly will have to deal with at some point. So sorry about my rant, Mr. Chairman, but I just had to get that off my chest.
It's quite all right. One other point I was going to make is that do we have any data on, in this probably not at the state level, but the number of people who are homeless who are suffering from mental illness? That's a huge number, isn't it? I see Dr. Schuster out here. She probably could put that number off the top of her head, but I would think it's greater than 50%, isn't it?
Sure. There's a couple of different methodologies used to count persons experiencing homelessness. One is called the point-in-time count. That is mandated by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. Kentucky does do one every year. We don't have the 2021 figures. It is conducted in the last week of January annually. And so this year was a little bit odd because vaccines were not readily available. And so the street count, the unsheltered count piece was just kind of limited. So Kentucky's figures from about 2013 have gone down. We have decreased our rate of homelessness, relatively speaking, through the point-in-time count methodology from about 6,000 down to about 4,000. Now, keep in mind, it's just one snapshot, not a cumulative count of all people experiencing homelessness. Within that 4,000 figure, generally about 600 folks report severe mental illness, but also that's severe, that is self-reported. Then there's also substance use disorder. They may report that. Generally speaking, on a nationwide basis, we estimate that about half of folks experiencing homelessness may be experiencing mental illness. That that percentage goes up when we're talking about people experiencing chronic homelessness, at least a year of homelessness over a 3-year period. And like the person Tom was talking about, Joe, that would be an example of someone who would fall into that category.
Senator Higdon, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Adrian, you brought up a question to me the other day. That's probably it dealt with homeless folks, but I'll change hats and talk about transportation and let you know that I'm concerned about your issue about IDs. And I brought this up to the transportation cabinet when we first started working on the new driver's license and how to handle or how to make available IDs to homeless and those who could not find transportation to the regional centers. We've come a long way with that, and look forward to working with you on that.
We are very much looking forward to working with you, Chairman Higdon. Just quick PSA, if you will indulge me, Chair. We are working on a piece of legislation with Representative Bridges in Paducah to kind of reform the way that that people experiencing homelessness can obtain an ID, a low-cost ID. In 2011, the General Assembly created a legal pathway for folks to be able to do that. A little bit has changed over the last 10 years, so it does need a little bit of updating, but we look forward to working on that in the 22 regular session.
Representative Prunty on Zoom.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Adrian, always good to hear from you. Don't forget, I'm glad you mentioned Paducah because there's a lot more Western Kentucky that pass Bowling Green. So.
Yes, there is.
My question is, the medical respite, is there a way that you all dovetail with the services? Like if someone does have severe mental illness, what I heard in your testimony was if somebody goes in the hospital for a surgery or some other medical condition and you're trying to transition them out and keep from readmitting, et cetera. If they have a severe mental illness or other issues, is there a way you all dovetail with other services or just...
Absolutely.
This is Tom's favorite topic. So go for it.
Yeah, as you might tell, I've been 35 years in healthcare, mostly in hospitals. And again, we look a lot to the National Institute on Medical Respite Care, which is a special initiative of the Healthcare for the Homeless Council, which is national, and they're actually funded by CMS to study homelessness and specifically these days medical respite. But yes, and let me draw a flow chart mentally for you. So the person could, this would be a pretty typical pathway. The person would be admitted to or present to the emergency department. Again, University Hospital had an emergency psychiatry department where they did quick assessment, so I'm real familiar with their work. The person would be seen like in an emergency room. Then they would be admitted to an inpatient unit, like for a drug overdose, a drug overdose. Then what would happen is they would, instead of being discharged to the streets, they would be discharged to the medical respite program. While in the medical respite program, think that now becomes the hub, and they reach out to a recovery housing. They reach out to whatever services are appropriate, transportation services, benefit eligibility, etc., to make sure that they qualify. So then they would work on actually discharging from the medical respite program into another program. It could be, community-based housing. And again, what Sheila and Steve were talking about would be another like a housing option that would be created to them. We are paying a lot of attention to navigation services. Again, the Community Coordination of Care did a lot of work from the healthcare sector thinking of, and then it's resulted in Metro United Way creating an effort called United Community, which uses the Unite Us platform so that we can make electronic referrals for social services, transportation, housing, food, etc., electronically, and that enables us to actually track the impact. Like how long does it take to a company to a referring agency to respond to services like that? So no, it's very much the medical respite is really a period of very intense care coordination. Did that answer your question? Yeah.
Yes, that you're trying to maybe prevent them from staying homeless. You're trying to complete the circle.
Yes. And again, I won't go into all the details about the kind of outcomes tracking that's been recommended, but housing stability is one of the major outcome indicators that a lot of respite programs track.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your answer, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Co-Chairman Meredith.
Thank you, Co-Chair Elliott, and thank you for the presentation. It's always interesting, always fascinating. Just want to comment, I particularly like your model of the whole person care. I think it's very similar, if I can speak on behalf of Senator Alvarado, of what we've been looking for. You know, we don't have good coordination amongst our healthcare community and other community providers. And
yes, sir. Again,
we know 67% of healthcare issues are based on social determinants, and we don't intertwine that in. And this is a way to do it. We think there's a better model of delivery than what we presently have. So I like that, support that, and would like to see that advance. But I'll finish with Ms. Bush. I'm just surprised that you're so cynical when it comes to MCOs doing something that's not altruistic. You know, I'm sure that it is in their case, but I'm just teasing you.
I feel the need to defend myself, if I may, Mr. Chair.
No need to, truly, but I want to commend WellCare for that. That's the kind of thinking that we've been looking for. You've got to think outside the box. They are responsible for the care of these patients. This is one of the elements. They should step up and do this. So I commend them, and first time I have an opportunity to talk to them, I'll tell them so. But I appreciate you bringing that to our attention. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, and that reminds me when you mentioned MCOs, and you specifically mentioned WellCare. Have there been discussions with the other MCOs with your respective groups or in your capacities as to expanding it to them as well, or how have those gone?
In 2020, we were able to, Tom really organized a series of learning calls. We had 3 or 4 in the fall of 2020, and he invited all of the MCOs that have plans in Kentucky to participate and talk about how they were addressing people experiencing homelessness, their social determinants of health, and then if they had medical respite models in maybe other states that they're operating in, to share about those. And Tom, I don't know if you want to add anything, but Tom was really the driving force behind that.
Yeah, so all 6 of them are interested in housing and specifically medical respite. And again, what we wanted them to do was to basically identify programs that were successful in other states, and then think of ways to customize them to the various communities throughout Kentucky. So and some have actually hired housing specialists, again, not specifically necessarily focused on medical respite, but on housing their members.
Senator Alvarado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Question or comment?
You know, really good stuff. This intrigues me in a bit. I've had a lot of discussions with our MCO partners in the past about, you know, that a large percentage of your Medicaid costs are consumed by a very small population of people. And so how do we find a way to keep those folks out of the hospital? I've had these discussions multiple times, and I've had a lot with WellCare in the past as well. They have, to their credit, they have improved in a lot of things, Mr. Chairman. I know it's tough to sometimes for us to, you know, it'd be easy to bash these guys, but they have listened on some of these topics. One of them I've often talked about is using direct primary care, which is physicians who don't want to necessarily contract with Medicaid or don't contract with any insurance companies, but are willing to take care of a subset of population of patients. I would think this would be ripe for someone like that, where you could hire a practitioner and say, we're going to pay you a fee per person. You're going to manage all their care. And so if they're in respite care programs, they can kind of help manage that. A couple things as you were presenting, you put up the insurance breakdown, because as you were starting the presentation, I thought, well, not everybody here is under Medicaid. And I was impressed that we actually had 8% under commercial plans, which I find surprising with people that are homeless. I'm wondering if you can explain some of that. How many of these are Medicare? Makes me wonder how many of these folks are over the age of 65 or 62 in some cases that would require Medicare. And even if the state says, hey, we're willing to do this with Medicaid, are those commercial plans and Medicare willing to provide care for these programs?
So I'll try and remember all those and tell me if I don't. So number one, this is a true speculation that those people that are covered by the commercial plans, they're being covered up to age 26 under their parents' plan. That's what we think that's happening there. We did go back, and it actually varies significantly by regions. And again, I didn't analyze all of the area development districts, but in the Louisville market, it really is a very heavy Medicaid market. As you move away from the downtown, you're starting to you see the number of Medicare patients actually increasing. And it seems like in northern Kentucky, they had a higher percentage of Medicare Advantage paid. Again, the ones in Louisville, on the outer rings of Louisville, were the traditional Medicare, and then in northern Kentucky, it was more the Medicare Advantage plans.
So a lot of those folks either are being signed, I mean, I don't know if they're being signed up at the point of care or if they've been signed up, or maybe if the repeat customers are coming in pretty regularly. I would imagine if there's veterans, the VA Medical Center, I don't know if you're putting that under commercial or not, that might be a larger group of that as well. So I was curious about that even if the state did implement something, are these other plans willing to do this, or is the federal government willing to recognize some of these programs? Or are we having trouble?
I think they are, and the reason for that, again, if I was a hospital administrator with a large Medicare population, I would be very concerned about my readmission rates. So that would be their financial incentive to become involved. And again, the Medicare Advantage plans are risk-based contracts. So again, they're doing a lot of things specifically in the area of value-added benefits now, which certainly might fall under this purview. They're very willing to look at the data. And again, I don't want to get too much into the data, but really the best data is going to come from the hospitals themselves by looking at their billing data. And again, we have talked exclusively about inpatient admissions because at the time, I don't think the health facilities and service data had a lot of emergency department data in it. But the way that we had that really deep insight into the patterns at University Hospital was by looking at our own billing data. And again, that would answer Chair Elliott's observation all about the actual diagnoses that were driving the disease. I mean, the readmissions and all that. And again, that's why we intervened so intensely. And again, we had actually a cohort of 120 patients that we worked with. The total savings was around $700,000. It sits that Joe was the most significant driver of that savings as far as one individual was concerned.
It makes total sense. Two other quick questions. I know you mentioned $675 for an average ER visit. That's on the lower side, I would argue. It's probably a higher savings than that. That might just be the getting checked in, some of the fees, and I mean, really, by the time you run tests in the world that we're in right now with healthcare, with a person who might be living on the street or you don't have a lot of records to depend on, tests abound. There's a defensive practice of medicine abounds in our state, so people are going to be ordering a lot of those when they come in. They probably have a lot of repeat tests, exposure to radiation, a lot of things.
Yeah,
that aren't
actually,
good for a lot of
Joe
those
had
folks.
65 CT scans.
So you think about a CT scan, is the radiation from a CT scan from one is equivalent to a full year's radiation exposure from the sun. So multiply times 65.
Yeah,
you get
and then Joe's actual history, if you looked at 2 years of data, it was 500 visits.
I mean, that's incredible. The other thing, 33% return to hospital rate for the members of the committee. Anything above 15% is considered to be poor. So most, again, in a nursing home setting, that's being tracked for us. Anything above 15% is kind of frowned upon. You're not doing a good enough job. 33% is well over double of what's expected from a lot of those. The last question I have, how long does somebody remain in a respite program? If they get admitted to a facility, let's say they have, like you mentioned earlier, somebody has a surgery of some sort, they have a surgical wound to maintain, they come into it and they get recovered. Do you have an idea of the average length of stay for someone before they get discharged?
I do. It's between, I hate saying this, but it's between 70 and 30 days. The 7 days is really the short end when you look at the literature. Typically, it's in the 14 to 21 day range, and then some people are, really, really much longer. And again, we are really talking about respite care following inpatient admissions. I think that when you get into like chemotherapy and some of the IV antibiotics, which is really can also be a very significant cost saver for a hospital, then that's when you might have the more extended stays. Again, another reason for each hospital, each MCO to kind of model their own data, but there is really a lot of variability. And some of there was a random clinical trial study done in Denmark. They used 14 days as their benchmark.
Again, a lot of these folks come to our nursing homes right now for a lot of this care, obviously, and they don't get discharged back to the streets. They wind up, you have to make sure you have a secure home environment. So a lot of them will come in, recover, they'll stay with us, and I'll see them, and they're walking around, they're normal. I'm like, why is this person here? They go, they have nowhere to go. And they'll stay in a nursing home setting where we're paying for those costs for 3, 4, 6 months until they find them a stable home environment. Once they reach that point, for you all, what happens if they've met their medical goals and everything is stable? If you don't have a home environment, do they ever get discharged to a non-stable home environment?
Yes, and since you brought up nursing homes, I want to address something there. What we also believe is that nursing homes will be more willing to take people for rehab care if they knew they can go, the pathway was from hospital, nursing home to respite care. What we're hearing now is a lot of nursing facilities are reluctant to take people experiencing homelessness because they're afraid they're going to get stuck with them. So we think that will actually work in decreasing the hospital length of stay, then the appropriate medical nursing care setting, and then us. Actually, some people are, when they leave respite care, they have recovered enough, they do go back to the streets. But the ideal is that they have established enough of a care plan and enough relationships. Again, that's one of the reasons for this connection back to primary care, is so that those medical gains will be sustained, and they'll know how to fill their prescriptions, et cetera, to keep them more medically stable, again, until a more permanent supportive housing arrangement can be arranged.
Yeah, the program makes a lot of sense. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you for your presentation, and I don't think we have any more questions or comments, but we appreciate it. Sure. And we're now down to item 6 on the agenda, an update on establishment of a provider credentialing alliance, which is House Bill 438 from the 2020 regular session. And we have Nancy Galvani, Brian Brzezowski, probably butcher Brzezowski.
Yes, sir.
And Justin Guilford, who is on Zoom. So the floor is yours, and you may begin.
All right. Well, thank you so much for inviting us. Co-chairs Elliott and Meredith, we're very pleased to be here to update you on the implementation of a credentialing alliance under House Bill 438 that you all passed earlier this year. And so, as you know, this alliance recognized the opportunity for a new partnership between the MCOs and certain provider associations to solve this long-standing problem with credentialing. It's really important that we have provider-friendly and timely credentialing because a provider cannot be reimbursed by an MCO until they're fully credentialed. And just kind of as a reminder to everyone, credentialing really involves a 2-step process. First is a verification of a provider's training, education, and licensure, and then a panel of professionals reviews that information and makes a final determination. And the issue has been that, we have had 5 MCOs, now we have 6 MCOs, and each MCO had its own separate process, separate committees, so you can see how that could entail a lot of problems for providers. And this has been a long-standing pain point for our members since managed care was initiated, and that is really why KHA has had an interest in trying to solve the problem. I will say for the last 2 years, KHA has had a very successful partnership with Aetna. In fact, we've been their delegated credentialing agent, and that has worked very well. And so what is allowed under House Bill 438 really allows us to expand our program that we've had, as I said, very successfully with Aetna. We have partnered with Aperture to be our credentialing verification organization. Aperture is a Kentucky-based company that has wide experience in doing credentialing across the nation and has been very involved in credentialing alliances in other states, and so they are our partner in setting up our Kentucky Credentialing Alliance. And I would like to publicly recognize and thank the leadership of the 3 largest MCOs, Aetna, Molina, and WellCare, who have all agreed to join our credentialing alliance. So we're very, very happy with that. At this time, I'd like to turn to Justin Guilford. He's the general counsel of Aperture, and he can give you more details on the operation of the alliance. Justin?
Thank you, Nancy. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, fantastic. Nancy really spelled it out best. Aperture has been involved in credentialing pretty much throughout the country for over 20 years. We're originally out of of Humana, but we've grown from that stage up to where we are now. And, you know, we were looking to help what's a clear problem for the providers in this state, in our home state where we're actually based, provide a solution that, you know, that will work to get rid of a lot of the problems Nancy was just talking about there. Streamlining things to where you don't have to fill out, you know, 5 applications and go through 5 separate processes and go through 5 separate committees just to get to the same place that you're looking to go. So it's been a real pleasure to kind of build this with KHA. I want to commend the KHA for taking a leadership stance concerning this problem in the Commonwealth, and also want to commend the 3 MCOs that have stepped up to the plate right off the bat, 2 of which are actually all 3 are existing clients of ours in some capacity. So we're very excited for the opportunity to provide this solution, and we are, as Nancy said, hard at work getting into the implementation of the Kentucky Alliance. That's going to be a very good thing for the providers here, just as it's been a very good thing for the providers in the other states where we provide the same services for this type of alliance system.
So we also wanted you to hear from Brian Brzozowski. He's our general counsel at KHA, and Brian has really taken the leadership in putting the alliance together, working closely with Justin and the MCOs. And we think we actually have a very unique program, and Brian's going to tell you just a little bit about that.
Sure. Thanks, Nancy. So under the bill, the providers the CVO is required to provide outreach and help desk services during common business hours, and we see KHA's role going forward as sort of a provider outreach on steroids. So we have a full-time employee who does nothing but work applications, which may be submitted incomplete. They may need verifying tax ID numbers. So we chase those applications down. Our employee meets with those people, and we have helped over the past 18 months, as Nancy said, working with Aetna. We have helped chiropractors, doctors, dialysis centers, home health services, hospice care, on and on, not just hospitals. So the list goes on. So everyone that needs to be credentialed, we have helped in some way with that process. So those applications in the past may have sat on some CVO's desk for months at a time, waiting to be handled because they're not clean applications. So we chase those down and turn them around as quickly as possible. That partnership with Aetna has worked very well for all parties concerned.
We're happy to answer any questions, but we're very excited to get it underway.
Thank you, and I think I see Co-Chairman Meredith, so I'm going to recognize him raising his hand.
Yes, very pleased to hear we're making some progress on this, but what's the status of the other 3 MCOs? What's the hesitancy, or is there a problem, or what's going on?
Well, we've had multiple meetings with all the parties, and we had reached out when we had the invitation to testify to find out kind of where everyone was. And so Humana has said they are declining to join the alliance. United said they're declining at this time, but they might be open to it later on, and Anthem has not yet answered us.
What's the reasoning for declining? Have they given any justification for it?
This is just what I'm telling you is what we were told.
So really, what you're saying is they have no intent to comply with the intent of the legislation?
All I can say, I can't speak for them to know really what all their thinking is, but you know what I'm relaying to you, Senator Meredith, this is the answer they gave to us.
So again, just to make sure we're all on the same page here, if you have a new provider comes to Kentucky, they'll submit their application to you folks, and they're cleared through Aetna, Molina, and WellCare, but they'll still have to make an individual application for Humana, Anthem, and United.
Yes, if they choose not to join. Again, we haven't heard from Anthem, but the other two have said they're declining at this time.
Then you don't have to say it. I'll say it. And obviously, they have no intentions of respecting the legislative intent with House Bill 438, and I'm very disappointed in that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Are there any other comments or questions? I don't think so.
Not related to this, folks, but why we have you here, and I appreciate the testimony you've given at appropriation of revenue and other committee meetings we had, but certainly very concerned about the future of rural health care, particularly rural hospitals. And I know before the pandemic that we had, I think there's something like 68 rural hospitals in Kentucky, and a quarter of those were viewed as financially distressed, and now we're at 50%. Has that worsened since over the past few months, or are we kind of stabilizing, or can you give me a...
I think we're still in the process of analyzing that. I know we're trying to look at revising our report on COVID losses, because our data only went through the end of 2020, and of course that didn't account for the huge increase that we've seen in staffing costs, vaccine distribution, just a whole host of costs that have happened this year. And again, there hasn't been any more federal funds coming out to help the hospital. So we are concerned. We already knew that we were down $1 billion just looking through 2020. So we are trying to update our numbers so that we can come back to you and let you know what that situation looks like. But, we are concerned. Utilization has still not bounced back to pre-COVID levels. And what the hospitals tell us is that the patients that are now in the hospital are sicker than ever. The acuity level is out the charts. And as you know, Senator Meredith, from running a hospital, you get a fixed DRG, and yet so our costs are higher. So sicker patients doesn't mean you're going to profit more for sure. It just means, it's costing us more to take care of these patients. And of course, that's draining our workforce as well, because, every patient just requires so much care. So it's a very concerning situation, but we can get back to you more on the financials, but that's something that we're monitoring certainly. And again, we want to thank, the General Assembly for approving that HRIP program. I've had so many hospitals say that had it not been for that program, they don't know what would have happened. So that is definitely helping our hospitals survive. But long term, we do have concerns.
Do you think your membership would have any problem with you developing a watch list for us of hospital individual financial performance?
I think our hospitals don't want to be named as to who is in precarious situation, but that's something that we're looking at. There's that financial strength index. That's something that we've testified in the past, and that's something that we can look at using cost report data, and that is something that we're monitoring. In fact, that's something that we're monitoring for the federal government tied to our HRIP program.
Well, the reason I ask is, the saying that a lot depends on who's hogs and who's Cabbage Patch, and for a lot of people, it's, that hospital's in trouble, but that's not my hospital. Well, it may be your hospital. You may not even be aware of it. And I think there's just some communication needs to be had to express the urgency of this situation. Because you've heard me say before, a rural community loses a hospital. It's like Louisville losing Ford or GE or UPS. It has that kind of economic impact. And I think we were all a little bit surprised on what happened with Our Lady of Bellefonte a couple of years ago. And many of us didn't see that coming. And with 1,000 employees in that community, that was obviously devastating. And I know they're trying to recover using some alternate delivery methods. But I think we need to have more information about this. So thank you. I'd appreciate that.
Senator Higdon.
Thanks. I know the hour's late, but just you kind of touched on something that sparked something that I've been curious about. Saw a report not long ago that only about 30% of Medicaid recipients are vaccinated. Have you? And you talked about the patients you have now are sicker, and is there a disproportionate amount of, I guess, Medicaid patients now versus a normal time or historic times, as you look at your patients now?
I mean, I don't think so. I think the patient mix is pretty consistent.
Okay.
I think in terms of acuity, the thing that we're seeing, and there's a lot of national reports about people foregoing care. People were afraid to come to the hospital due to COVID, and we're not sure if that's. We think people still may be afraid now, and that's something that we're trying to get more information on.
That's interesting, and thank you for that. Appreciate it.
You're welcome, and I think that's everything. I appreciate the presentation. The next meeting of this committee will be on November the 30th at 1 o'clock. And so if there's no further business to come before this committee, I would ask for a motion to adjourn. And we're adjourned.